Okay, we're going to get started. So hello everyone, my name is Sarah Cook and I'm head of the Environment Programme at the UN Global Compact Network UK. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the first session of our four-part Nature-Based Solutions for Business webinar series, kindly supported by our member company, One Carbon World. So before we dive into the content, we have a bit of housekeeping to cover. The session is being recorded and the recording will be emailed to you and made available on our website along with key takeaways. We have activated automatic captions, which you can choose to accept in the tools bar. As always, they are generated automatically by Zoom, so please do forgive any typos or mistakes made by the programme. We are in webinar mode, which means that all attendees will be muted and not visible on screen throughout the session. But of course, we always want to hear from you. So please do introduce yourselves in the chat, tell us where you're from, and you can also use the chat to tell us about any technical issues. But there will be plenty of time for a live Q&A session with our panelists at the end of the session. So if you have a question you'd like our experts to ask, please submit them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. And you can use the upvote function to bump the questions that you'd like us to answer the most. So next slide, please. So with conflict raging in Gaza, Ukraine, and many other regions of the world, we'd like to take this opportunity to remind you of the UN Global Compact human rights principles and urge you to ensure that your company is not complicit in human rights abuses through your direct operations or supply chain. And if you or your company are able to support UN agencies bringing relief to people in need, please do take a look at the links that have been shared in the chat. And now I'd like to take a moment to introduce the UN Global Compact and the UK network, if this is your first event with us. The UN Global Compact is the world's largest corporate sustainability initiative, with over 25,000 global participants who have made a CEO commitment to uphold our 10 principles. These universal principles are derived from UN treaties in the areas of human rights, labour, environment, and anti-corruption, and represent a blueprint for sustainable business. Here at the UK network, our mission is then to turn this global momentum on sustainability into practical action. And we have three main work streams: environment, social, and governance. And we host more than 100 events a year, including working groups and accelerator programs, to support our members and the wider business community here in the UK. If you're not already a member of the UN Global Compact, we would very much like you to consider joining us. And again, you can find more information on how to join through the link in the chat. So a key part of our mission is to drive business engagement with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, aka the SDGs. So we would just like to flag that today's session is especially linked to goals 13, 14, 15, and 17. And now on to why we're all here today and what you can expect to learn across this webinar series. We've developed this series to provide practical guidance on how companies can choose, implement, and finance a range of nature-based solutions in line with their commercial and sustainability priorities, and as closely as possible in line with the IUCN Global Standard for NBS. First three webinars will highlight various types of nature-based solutions that can be implemented across different environments, focusing on land-based solutions, urban solutions, and freshwater and marine solutions. And then the final session will look at how we can unlock more public and private finance, close the financing gap, and enable nature-based solutions to be deployed at scale. So be sure to register for all the sessions by following the link that Justin has popped in the chat. By the end of the series, we hope you'll have a better understanding of the various business cases for implementing and investing in nature-based solutions, how to identify suitable nature-based solutions that could be implemented within your direct operations, across your value chain, or beyond the value chain, depending on your commercial priorities, your sustainability objectives, and the biomes and regions in which you are operating. How to align the design and implementation of nature-based solution projects with the IUCN Global Standard for Nature-Based Solutions, and how the private sector can contribute towards closing the financing gap for nature-based solutions. And now I have the pleasure to hand over to our wonderful Hayley Warrens from One Carbon World, who will be moderating today's session. Over to you, Hayley.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and hello everybody. Welcome today to the first session on the UN Global Compact Network's UK's four-part webinar series on nature-based solutions for business. My name is Hayley Warrens, and I am the Head of Carbon Removals at One Carbon World. One Carbon World are a not-for-profit organisation operating in 55 countries around the world, and we were winners of the International Climate Positive Award at COP28. We are a UN observer organisation and are delighted to be delegates at this year's COP29 in November. In my role at One Carbon World, I oversee our nature-based solutions programme, and this includes our carbon removals inventory service for forestry, land use and agriculture sector, and our flagship Kuza Miti agroforestry project in Kenya. I'm a chartered environmentalist and have extensive experience in strategic leadership for carbon management and climate adaptation, having led the development of the climate adaptation strategy centred on nature-based solutions in Wales, which was noted as best practice by the National Infrastructure Commission for Wales. Before I introduce the fantastic lineup of speakers that we have on today's webinar, I'd like to invite the audience to take 20 seconds or so to fill out a short poll on your screen so that we can get a better understanding of the extent of which organisations are already engaging in nature-based solutions. So just shortly, a poll will pop up on your screen. So if you could please either say yes, no, or don't know, and then I will share the results in about 20 or so seconds. Okay, if we could now see the poll results, if possible, on the screen to show what they indicate. So that's really interesting. Around 47% have said yes, they do implement or invest in nature-based solutions. 34% have said no, and 18% don't know. So what we're going to do today is showcase some fantastic examples of what different businesses are doing to implement NBS. So in today's webinar, we'll be focusing on land-based solutions, looking at how businesses can build the case internally to implement or invest in these solutions. We'll learn about some of the key considerations that businesses should take into account when embedding nature-based solutions into their land management practices to ensure that their solutions align with the IUCN global standard for nature-based solutions. We'll be highlighting case studies of how leading businesses can successfully use terrestrial nature-based solutions such as peat restoration techniques and regenerative agriculture to regenerate critical landscapes, sequester carbon, and address their impacts on nature. To help bring these points to light, I'm joined by an excellent panel of speakers today. So we have Peter Beare from the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. We also have Annie Donegan, who is from KPMG's Global Climate Change, Decarbonisation and Nature Centre. We have Boris, who's a Regional Director of Europe for the International Union for Conservation of Nature. And we have Rachel Short, who's a Senior Ecology Manager at Scottish Power and Renewables, and Tom Blenkinsop, who's a Product Sustainability and Stewardship Lead at Reckitt. So I'll now be handing over to Peter and Annie for their joint presentation on the business cases and drivers for investing in terrestrial nature-based solutions and how businesses can get started with identifying and implementing the right kinds of solutions for their business.
Fantastic. Thank you, Hayley. And also thank you to UN Global Compact, the UK chapter, and One Carbon World for having us along. We'll start with some quick introductions because we're doing a joint bit here. My name is Peter Beare. I lead the work on nature-based solutions at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. The WBCSD is a CEO-led group of over 240 multinational companies who are taking collective action on moving forward on sustainable development priorities across the board. I'm joined by Annie.
Hi everyone, I'm delighted to be here with you all today. My name is Annie Donegan and I'm a manager at KPMG's Global Decarbonisation Hub, supporting our global clients and member firms on climate risk and nature. And as part of my role, I had the pleasure of working with Peter at WBCSD on the development of the nature-based solutions map that we're going to discuss today.
Fantastic. Thanks, Annie. If we go to the next slide, just a quick reiteration of a couple of the points that Hayley raised earlier on. So what we'll be covering in the next sort of 8 minutes or so will be a couple of main points. One on what the drivers are for companies investing in nature-based solutions, and then taking a bit more of a look at specifically how we can identify and implement the best NBS for the business. So we look at the next slide and get stuck right into some of the material on the business case and drivers around this topic. And we sat down with our member companies earlier on in 2023, basically, and asked the question, well, they asked the question for us to discuss as a group in our NBS working group, which has over 55 companies, representatives involved. Effectively asking the question, as companies, we understand the societal case for investing in NBS. We recognize that they benefit climate, nature, and equity, and there's a reason at a global level for us to be using these solutions more proactively. However, we do need to be able to articulate a business case for this as well. So what clarity can we share in terms of why the CFO, the finance team, the CEO should sign off on allocating the resources to using an NBS activity. And the truth is that there are many sources of business value as well as societal value from nature-based solutions. We've listed a couple of them on the slide here, and many of them center around this idea of nature-based solutions to business challenges, doing things that the company already wants or needs to do in a way that then benefits climate, nature, and equity while you're doing it. So thinking about some of the ones that are kind of outlined on the slide here, risk management and mitigation can represent a significant issue, a significant cost for the company, and being able to implement NBS in order to shore up supply chains that are creaking because of climate shocks, or improve the quality of raw materials that are entering that supply chain, to look at reducing maintenance costs by using self-maintaining ecosystems in place of hard infrastructure. And then also, obviously, as this agenda continues to move forward, kind of making good use of the fact that there's also increasing pressure for good quality sustainability action, but speaking about this in a way that does not compromise on the business's ability to do business. So that's kind of a quick outline of the situation that we were discussing and working on this topic with our member companies, and that's what led to the development on the next slide. Our piece of work we launched a couple of weeks ago, a couple of months ago. Sorry, it's been a short summer. That I think the links will be put into the chat for you to access. But this nature-based solutions blueprint really kind of was the start of this conversation, the start of shifting this perspective to recognize nature-based solutions as solutions both to business challenges and societal challenges and opportunities. And in this piece of work, which I think if you click one more time on the slides, you'll get the kind of, yeah, there we go. Broke this down into 6 stages that companies can follow, effectively starting with identifying what are the challenges and opportunities that the business is facing, whereas other companies already wanting to take action. How can we then match those needs up with the NBS that delivers the most value for the company directly? As a third stage in this process, how does the company find all of the different sources of value, all the different benefits to the company, and more broadly to the society around them and to the planet from that NBS activity? Then a couple of important stages on an introduction to initial designing and costing of these types of solutions. And then finally, a quick run through of some basic multi-criteria decision analysis to see how companies can compare apples with apples, like for like, with these types of solutions. And all of this built off of a set of 8 case studies from our member companies, one of whom you'll hear from a bit later on when Tom shares Rec's perspective, effectively showing that this is not a theoretical exercise, but this is in fact how companies are already building their business cases for using nature-based solutions. So with that, I've spoken a little bit about what the business cases and drivers are for looking at NBS. The next question that comes up is how do I identify the right ones to undertake? And that's where our NBS map work picks up. And I'll hand over to Annie to talk about that a bit more.
Thanks, Peter. So before we go into the map, we'd just like you all to take 30 seconds and think about where your company interfaces with nature and what particular challenges your business has in those regions. For example, do you have a facility that depends on water from a nearby river or lake, or does your supply chain draw on natural resources by farmers or foresters? If we move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So we've actually developed a tool to support you with identifying nature-based solutions or NBS based on the answers to these questions. When working on the blueprint that Peter just ran through, it really highlighted a need for a sort of portfolio of NBS arranged in terms of the value that they offer to companies. This is a really critical challenge as NBS are often not represented as business solutions, and this can make it difficult for companies to navigate which solutions deliver which benefits. So stage 2 of the blueprint, as we mentioned, focused on selecting appropriate NBS. And to enable companies to do this, we've built a complementary tool called the NBS map. The objective of this simple tool is to help companies that are considering using NBS to identify which solution could offer them the greatest value for a specific challenge or opportunity that they'd like to focus on. Using the map itself is really straightforward and requires just 2 pieces of information from the user. Firstly, what is a business challenge or opportunity that you're looking at? And secondly, in which ecosystem or biome does it occur? The output of the map is intended as a first step to help users shortlist the most suitable NBS to address the business challenge or opportunity in question. If we can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So here is just a snapshot of a bit of the map, and we've highlighted the first 3 steps for using it. So you can see here element 1 on the left-hand side that lists the typical business challenges and opportunities. In addition to this is element 2, which lists the biomes and ecosystems. With these 2 inputs, users are directed to the outputs, or element 3 here, which identifies the suitable NBS types related to the business challenge or opportunity and ecosystem in question. If we could move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So once the user has identified suitable NBS types using the map, they can proceed to this NBS list. So element 4 here provides a summary description of the NBS type, examples, and potential co-benefits. In future iterations, so this is just the version 0 of the map, so we do hope to further develop the map and provide more detailed examples and case studies of specific NBS types and associated benefits. If we can move to the next slide, and I'll hand back over to Peter.
Fantastic. Thanks, Annie. So just kind of walk through a little bit of this information, kind of riffing off of what it was that UNGC's UK chapter asked us to talk about here around building business cases and identifying the right NBS. So just a couple of things. I mean, this, as I said earlier on, this is the beginning of a conversation, unpacking this really important facet of the NBS topic. If you'd like to get involved, you're welcome to access the resources either through the links, I think that'll be posted in the chat, or through the QR codes I've popped on the slides here. By all means, do give us feedback and insight on what you think of the work that we're undertaking. As Annie mentioned, we will be working on this version 1 of the map. Oh, I've lost the slides. Yeah, so we're working on version 1 of the map, which is obviously also something that we welcome insights and input, and obviously where available case studies as well. We've also, I think if you click one more time, volume will just move seamlessly through. Into a quick outline, we do also have a workshop that we've designed around this, helping to explain and unpack this discussion around building business cases for nature-based solutions and allowing participants to kind of practice run using some of this step-by-step guidance and tools that we've built, which we've already done with more than 200 people. So if that is any of the above are of interest, don't hesitate to reach out and let me know. I've popped my email address at the bottom of the slide there. Happy to hear insights and input from the people who've joined us on the call today, and looking forward to moving this conversation forward with you. Annie, back to you.
Thank you. If we move to the next slide. So to summarize, today we've spoken about some of the key drivers for investing in nature-based solutions, as well as outlining how companies can build a business case for nature-based solutions and identify the appropriate solutions to implement. So we now know that we have the knowledge and the resources to build a clear value proposition for nature-based solutions, moving from a least cost to max value priority. The question now is, how do we implement NBS in a sustainable and impactful way? And with that, I will hand back over to Hayley.
Thank you very much for your brilliant presentation, Peter and Annie. It was really, really insightful. Thank you. I will now hand over to Boris to introduce the IUCN's Global Standard for Nature-Based Solutions and the key considerations that businesses should take into account as part of designing, implementing and monitoring terrestrial nature-based solutions to ensure their alignment with these standards. Thank you, Boris.
Thank you, Hayley, and good morning, afternoon, evening to all the participants. It's just great to see so high interest in nature-based solutions. My name is Boris and I'm IUCN Regional Director for Europe, and here to present on behalf of a larger team of IUCN colleagues. Just kind of to flesh out a few highlights on nature-based solutions. So next slide, please. Also, just a brief intro on IUCN for those who haven't been so far in touch much. I mean, IUCN is a membership organization and has a very strong component of expertise, and 7 expert groups that are associated to IUCN. And then within, we have a number of task forces and specialist groups who are charged with dealing with nature-based solutions. So we speak about around 1,400 members and some 15,000 experts all over the globe, including states, research, NGOs, and indigenous. Next slide, please. This was to introduce a little bit where the nature-based solutions comes from and where IUCN global standards and knowledge tools derive from, and it's pretty much that expert base that we use for developing standards and knowledge. And in 2020, just a little bit more than 4 years ago, IUCN launched the global standard for nature-based solutions. That is to try to define a little bit and frame this discussion around what nature-based solutions are and how they can work. It was a rather iterative process with lots of consultation involved before officially launching the global standard for nature-based solutions. And as you can see, it builds on 8 criteria, which really looks across the environmental, social, and economic landscapes, and then each criteria having a set of indicators, basically, that explain in more detail. Next slide, please. There are, of course, a number of principles that the nature-based solution standard sits on, and of course, a number of social, environmental challenges that it tries to address, from biodiversity conservation to disaster risk reduction, food security, health, and similar. And of course, there is a lot of terms around on nature-based or nature-derived or nature-inspired solutions. There is a slight distinction, of course. So what we talk about is really focusing on nature-based solutions. So we are deriving those solutions from nature. And try really to put them in place in order to address those challenges. There is a set of norms, of course, and of course a number of considerations that have been taken into account, and the nature-based solution standard really looks into from transparency and inclusiveness to trade-offs, benefits, sustainability, scale, and similar. Next slide, please. And here we are. So nature-based solutions, and I mean, it's all available online, of course, and happy to provide any additional information. It is the standard itself, but of course, there are a number of associated tools which we develop in order to support interested parties in engaging on nature-based solutions. So one of them is the nature-based solution self-assessment tool that's been developed after the standard has been launched, and really tries to help people interested in engaging in nature-based solutions understand a little bit more to which extent their intervention can be considered or regarded as a nature-based solutions. I have to say that nature-based solutions from the onset haven't been designed as a normative a standard compared to some other standards and tools that IUCN does. For example, the red list of threatened species is well known. So it's sort of it's a framework, you know, where then one can design and apply understanding to which extent, you know, that intervention falls under the criteria. And in order to support that process, we developed this self-assessment tool, which is an online tool. It's free of use. People can simply enter their nature-based solutions, their intervention, and it goes through criterion by criterion and then looks into different indicators. And then there is a report that's being generated, which is then, you know, organized in traffic lights, saying if you're below 25% meeting a MBS criteria and indicators, then that shouldn't be considered as nature-based solutions and on, kind of, you know, from green to red and back. Next slide, please. There are other tools which kind of, you know, really interested for businesses. I just wanted to highlight, this is not the only one, just IBAT, but IBAT being quite a well recognized and in use. And basically what it does is that it brings together a different important global data sets of nature, such as the global database on protected areas, which close to 300,000 protected areas in it. And then the IUCN Red List of Species, and it's 150. K and key biodiversity areas. So basically overlays those data sets, and then businesses can apply and access and then look into the impact of their intervention at spatial scale. So it's very interesting, and businesses are using it more and more. And as you can see, kind of, you know, it again is it's a partnership which brings several important organizations together in making it happen. Next slide, please. And then just a couple of slides on where we, as IUCN, engage with businesses, and there are different ways of engaging. Number of sectors, of course. I mean, here just mentioned in agri and food and energy, extractives as well. But there are different ways from really looking into planning phase and strategic planning. All the way to interventions, you know, either reviewing directly a strategic plans or different specific projects, or setting up advisory panels, independent scientific panels, which can then advise on different types of interventions. Next slide, please. And here is just a list of some of the engagements. So just to draw your attention on the last two here on the list. Stora Enso and Ecovende, it's quite recent ones where we, for example, with Stora Enso, which one of the leaders in the market with wood and pulp supply, they've really tried to look into in some of their sites to see if we can apply some very concrete measures, like, you know, regenerative production that are more aligned with nature-based solution standards. Or Ecovende, for example, where we helped set up an independent technical scientific advisory panel to advise on their offshore wind turbines. And last slide, please. And also just to say that, you know, it's UK a compact, just to say that IUCN has 50 members in UK, and UK National Committee IUCN is leading on the peatland code, which is also a very interesting setup of carbon credits. And more businesses are subscribing to. So I'd be more than happy to provide some linkages and advise if there are any businesses who would like to engage on the peatland code. Thanks a lot for this opportunity. I'm very happy to stay in touch.
Thank you so much, Boris, for your fascinating presentation. I will now hand over to Rachel, who's going to present on Scottish Power Renewables peatland restoration projects, sharing the business case for implementing the project and how the project is managed and resources to ensure that its objectives are successfully met. Thank you, Rachel.
Hi everyone, I'm Rachel Short and I'm a Senior Ecologist at Scottish Power Renewables. I'm delighted to be here today to talk to you all. As my slides there, good. As the key messages from my talk, I will talk about peatlands, what they are, why they are important. I'll talk about some of the work that Scottish Power Renewables have been doing, including a case study, and then I'll finish off with some practical hints and tips that will hopefully be helpful for those of you on the call who are either implementing peatland restoration yourselves or looking to do so. So if we could move to the next slide, please. So just a little bit about Scottish Power. So we generate 100% renewable energy. We have 2 gigawatts of onshore wind, solar and battery. We have 10,000 hectares of land under habitat management. So most of that is peatland restoration, but it does also include other nature-based solutions such as native tree planting. So we have a team of in-house ecologists. So there's 6 of us who are based permanently within Scottish Power, and we work together to deliver our peatland restoration work. Can move to the next slide, please. So just to cover, I mean, some of you in your call will probably already be familiar with what peatland is, but I thought it is worth just going over. So peatlands are made of peat. Peat is a dark-coloured organic waterlogged soil. It needs specific conditions to form, and in the UK it needs to be very wet. So we have a lot of peatland in Scotland, unfortunately, because it's very wet here. That's where I'm based. But you can see this basic diagram here. The blue line is the water table, and basically as long as the water table remains close or near to the surface of the peat, then the peat remains wet. And peat is formed by the organic material that's present within the plants, the material that grows on the peat, that basically breaks down very slowly in these wet, acidic, waterlogged conditions, and that leads to the formation of peat. So the carbon that's present within that plant material, that will stay locked within the peat. And as long as the peat remains wet, then the carbon will continue to exist within the peat. And peat will forms slowly over time. So about 1 centimetre is formed every 10 years, and it can become very deep. So I think the deepest I'm aware of in Scotland is about 12 metres. So you can appreciate that's pretty deep. Next slide, please. And why are peatlands important? So I've already touched on carbon storage, but they're also very important for biodiversity. So peatlands support a big range of plant and animal species that you only get on peatland habitats. So that's why they're important for biodiversity. And in terms of a nature-based solution, you know, they are really excellent option because they tackle not only the biodiversity crisis, but also climate change as well. So they hit both of those, which is why they are an excellent choice. Peatlands are also important for water quality and flood risk alleviation. That is because peatlands that are restored, they basically hold water for longer and they discharge it at a slower rate. So that's why it's really important for water quality and flood risk as well. And peatlands are also very important from a cultural point of view because they've been in our landscapes, you know, for a very long time. Just go to the next slide, please. So in terms of the work that Scottish Power have been doing, so first of all, why have we been undertaking this work? So we've delivered 2,700 hectares of peatland restoration to date, and we've got a lot more to come. And the main driver for this work is usually linked to a planning requirement. So as part of our renewable energy developments, we quite often have a requirement to undertake peatland restoration. That's not the only mechanism. There are other ways that we deliver it, but that is the main one. And how do we know what we need to do in our peatland restoration work? So we started doing this work about 17 years ago. So you can appreciate at that time, there weren't really any developed methods, or certainly not developed methods that have been rolled out at landscape scale. So we undertook some trials 17 years ago at some of our wind farm sites to try and establish methods that were going to be effective in terms of that they work, but also that they're, you know, economically viable as well, because obviously these methods, they need to be able to be rolled out at a large scale. So we undertook these trials, and once we were confident that they worked, we then rolled them out at a larger landscape scale. In terms of investment, so we've invested about 4.4 million to date. So that includes the peatland restoration works themselves, but also monitoring, research, and long-term management as well. And in terms of recognition, like this work, you know, it has been industry leading. We were the first ones to develop a lot of the peatland restoration methods, you know, that are now included in Nature Scots Peatland Action Compendium. We also won an award from RSPB, and we were the lead authors for the IUCN Peatland and Forestry publication as well. Next slide, please. So in terms of a case study, I'll just talk briefly about Whiteley Wind Farm. Some of you might be aware it's the UK's largest wind farm. It's located just near to Glasgow. It has 215 turbines and a generation capacity of 539 megawatts. So it has a very large habitat management plan associated with it. So that's 2,547 hectares. And just under half of that is peatland restoration. So that work has been delivered. It was completed last year. It's probably the largest scale peatland restoration work to be delivered by a developer in the UK. And in terms of how I thought it was important to mention how we engage with stakeholders. So we have a habitat management group at Whiteley. So that is basically formed of key stakeholders. So we have Nature Scott, RSPB, we have the local councils, and we have landowners as well. So that's a way that we engage with our key stakeholders. And any changes that we need to implement to the peatland restoration work at Whiteley, those changes need to be agreed with the habitat management group. So those early trials I talked about on the previous slide, they were implemented at Whiteley. And on the back of that, we also developed some monitoring methods. So obviously when you're undertaking this work, especially when you're doing it at scale, you need to know that it's working and that it's been effective. So we developed our own bog monitoring protocol where we baseline our work against 15 objectives, and we monitor over time the progress in our work in meeting those objectives. And that work has started at Whiteley and is now rolled out across all of our peatland restoration sites. And Whiteley is a great example of where you can deliver large-scale peatland restoration work alongside, with a renewable energy development. And Whiteley now has become almost a hub for ecology research. We have all the peatland restoration monitoring that we will continue long term. So those early trials, we think it's important to continue that monitoring long term so we can establish any long-term trends in the data. But we also undertake bird surveys. We do surveys for invertebrates as part of the Bioscan project. And we also fund 2 full-time wildlife rangers, and they are based at Whiteley, and they help to educate members of the public about peatland restoration. Go on to the next slide, please. So this slide is about the practical advice. So I was trying to think of people on this call, the kind of things that, might be useful to you if you are delivering your own peatland restoration work, or, you're thinking about doing it. So I mentioned that we have a team of the 6 of us full-time ecologists based in Scottish Power. Obviously, we cover the whole of the UK. We can't undertake all of the work ourselves. So we do subcontract out some of our work. So we have a framework in place with, trusted suppliers. And I think that is a really important part of this work, because it's really important to get suppliers who are trusted and deliver high quality work. So we have a framework with contractors. So we basically procure a machine and a driver, and we also use consultants as well to help us. So they will help mark out areas of peatland restoration and to go and, check on drivers and provide training to drivers who are operating machinery. So because we are ecologists based in Scottish Power, and we're all experts, or we like to think we are experts of peatland restoration, we train the contractors ourselves in-house, and I think that keeps the cost down a little bit. And in terms of due diligence, that's a really important thing to consider. We make sure that we phase our works. I think it is tempting to do a large area of peatland restoration in one go, but it's important to take into consideration other environmental impacts that can arise from peatland restoration work. And we have measured some of these impacts. So a good example is effects on downstream water quality. So we know that if you treat too much of land in one go, you can cause impacts on the water quality downstream. So that's something that we need to manage carefully. So we phase our work. So that means instead of treating it all in one go, we will spread the work between a number of years. We also undertake our work only in the wintertime to avoid impacts on breeding birds. And we also need to take into account infrastructure on site, such as electrical cables and that kind of thing. Wanted to touch briefly on costs, because I think it's really important that we talk about how much this work costs, because if other people are doing it cheaper or more expensive, it's important, to learn why, so we can try and drive down the cost of this work, because ultimately the cheaper this work is, the more of it we can deliver. So in terms of how much this work costs, the current costs, based on recent inflation, is between about 1,000 to about £2,500 per hectare. and the price, you know, there's quite a big range in that price, and that depends on conditions that you've got on site. There's a lot of different factors that go into that. And then just one other thing I just wanted to refer to was green finance. So because we are a developer and most of our peatland restoration work is linked to planning conditions, and it's how we have planning consent, we're not eligible for some of the green finance options such as the peatland code. And I think that is a barrier. You know, I think if developers were eligible for that, then that would open the door to allow us to deliver even more peatland restoration than we already do. And then just the final point was around land availability and land costs as well, because that is another barrier. You know, the price of land has gone up considerably, and being able to access that land as a developer is becoming more difficult. Just the last slide, please. So yep, that was the end of my talk. Hopefully you found it insightful and interesting, and my email address is on there. So if anyone has any questions later on, feel free to contact me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. That was really inspiring. For everybody who is watching the webinar series live today, please could you pop your questions in the Q&A box, and don't forget to upvote your favorite questions, because we will be discussing these in the Q&A session later. I will now hand over to Tom to present on the work that Reckitt has been doing to assess key sourcing landscapes in one of its supply chains in Indonesia as a way of determining which nature-based solutions to implement, and how Reckitt is also working alongside local stakeholders to ensure the successful delivery of nature-based solutions projects. Thank you, Tom.
No, cheers. Thanks so much, Hayley. Yeah, hi, I'm Tom from Reckitt. For those of you that may not be very familiar with Reckitt, we're a consumer goods company that's headquartered in the UK, but we have global brands in health, hygiene and nutrition. And as an organisation, we rely on healthy ecosystems for the supply of natural raw materials that go into our products. In particular, in the example I'm going to talk about today, we rely on latex, which we use from sustainable rubber sources, which produces our Durex condoms, which I'm sure many of you are aware of. We've been looking at how we can better protect and strengthen ecosystems using nature-based solutions. And what I want to talk to you today and take you through is the steps that we've taken to identify not only the types of nature-based solutions, but also identify those that are going to have the greatest impact within our landscape, and the steps that we've also then taken to engage with our local stakeholders to implement those, or start to implement those on the ground. So just go to the next slide, please. So just want to give you some of the business context on why this is such an important issue for Reckitt. And well, simply put, Reckitt is dependent on nature. We're dependent on ecosystems and the natural assets for our products. As I mentioned, latex goes into our condoms, but we also rely on a range of other natural raw materials for a number of our other projects. And we've been increasingly aware of the challenges from the increasing risks to nature-based assets. And so that's essentially supply chain continuity from our perspective, that if those ecosystems fail, or if the farmers move away from the production because something changes in the landscape, we may not be able to source that natural asset that we need for our products. And we've been working for a number of years, like a lot of companies, on doing good work around protection, but we've now realized that we need to move beyond protection and start looking more at, well, how do we strengthen ecosystems? How do we build resilience within those ecosystems? And nature-based solutions offer us a way of doing that, because it's not just about building the resilience in the nature part, it's also building resilience for the communities, for the farmers that are dependent on those ecosystems as well, and that we're dependent on as well to actually get our natural raw materials to go into the products. And so we've recognised as other people that, you know, nature now needs to be moving a bit more in-house. It needs to be taken into consideration and be part of any strategy because of this dependency. It can't be something siloed that we do separately. It's got to really be embedded in the work that we do. And our head of sustainability, David Cross, has this lovely mantra that I love rolling out that says, there's no healthy people or organisations without a healthy planet. And that's very much reflected by us and with our products as well. So what we've been working on is building analysis to understand, well, what are our impacts? Where's our dependencies on nature? We've been working to define metrics and looking what metrics are there and available. And it's about making sure they're good metrics as well, to help us not only measure impacts, measure improvements, but also help us identify interventions that are going to work at the local level, and then understand how we can engage locally to drive impact. And that's really critical, because we've seen from experience and from looking at other projects that are out there that top-down approach doesn't always necessarily work, especially in some of the complex natural material supply chains that we operate in. That you have to engage locally with the farmers, with the communities, to have that impact and be successful. So we're also looking at nature-based solutions because they enable us to build connected interventions. They're by no means a silver bullet, but because they allow you to address more than one issue at a time, you can address things on nature, climate, but also tie it into those social and economic problems you might see in your supply chains. And that's one of the reasons why we've really been focusing on them. And so we just go to the next slide, please. So the first step that we needed to take in order to identify the types of nature-based solutions we should be looking at implementing was to understand, well, what are our impacts and what are the risks within our supply chain and within our landscape. So essentially we started off by measuring our impacts to then inform us to prioritize the interventions. And we've been working with an organization called Nature-Based Insights. They're a social venture spin out from Oxford University, and they've developed this analytical method, this framework that not only helps us estimate our impact on biodiversity, but it uses established global frameworks and data sets to help us assess the key impacts in our sourcing landscapes. So not only do we get this biodiversity impact metric, which is the benchmark by which we're going to be assessing our impacts on nature and biodiversity, but we get this raft of additional analysis that helps inform our decisions. So we're building this comprehensive picture of the landscape before we actually do anything. So the model helps us then prioritize what types of interventions we might want to consider implementing on the ground. So it enables to look at things such as where are the key areas to protect, manage or restore? What are the critical natural assets within the landscape? Where's their ecosystem connectivity? It also does a mapping at looking at risks and climate hazards, so things like deforestation, flooding risks, as well as flagging where there are carbon stocks and potential carbon sequestration options for us to, again, look at exploring as part of any nature-based solution to put in place. I could just jump to the next slide, please. So I'm just going to walk you through the steps around that process of assessing landscape impacts and how we've used it to then make informed decisions on the types of nature-based solutions that we could put in place. And some of this will echo back to what Peter and Annie were saying about the nature-based solutions blueprint that WBCSD has put in place as well. So to start off with, like I've already mentioned, we're using this analytical model that's been developed by Nature-Based Insights that leverages global data sets that are available. It's southern Thailand that we've been primarily working in. So the first step is doing this landscape analysis. Let's just jump to the next, please. That analysis considers a whole range of dimensions, so biodiversity, carbon, water, but also then provides that comprehensive picture of what's going on in the landscape. So the nature-related impacts, where the risks are, what the opportunities are. As I mentioned, we're trying to build this comprehensive picture of what's actually happening on the ground, what's happening with our landscape before we do anything. Because we want to understand what activities we can actually put in place, what's going to work and what's going to have the greatest impact. And we've actually used this analysis to engage with our stakeholders. And I'll talk about that a bit more a bit later on. I could just go down to the next slide, please. So one of the key things we get out of the analysis, which I mentioned we've been using, is obviously we're focusing on trying to make an improvement on our impacts on biodiversity. So we get that metric calculated from this model, and that's calculated on a range of different pressures. Next slide, please. Next build. And what we're using the model for is essentially looking at the interventions to improve biodiversity and evaluating them using the model outputs and seeing how those interventions will look if we put them in place in our landscape. And modelling those impacts of interventions on the biodiversity impact score, which is what we're focusing on primarily, enables targets to be costed and set. So what we're using the model to do is look at interventions, look at nature-based solutions that we could put in place, assess what impact they'll have on our BIM score, but then also taking into consideration, well, what other impacts will they have on that in that landscape for the local communities? Are they offering any other additional benefits that we can support as well as getting this improvement on our BIM score? Next bill, please. So just to touch on this kind of beyond that, once you've actually got your interventions in place, your nature-based solutions have been rolled out, it's really important to actually implement a monitoring strategy. And we see this as an additional way of facilitating the kind of landscape level collaborations of the work that we're doing with our stakeholders, not only just because we want to make sure that the interventions are doing what we expect them to do, but we want to link this to those local communities to support inclusive outcomes. We want to support them potentially taking ownership over these interventions and potentially link that also to ecosystem payment services further on down the line, that we can engage them to be helping support this kind of monitoring and evaluation process as we move forward after implementation. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned, we recognise we can't do this work on our own. We can't deliver nature-based solutions as a single entity. We need to collaborate with people already in the landscape. And we've actually been working with 3 key organisations in southern Thailand to develop projects and develop how we could manage them and monitor them going forward to achieve inclusive outcomes and benefits for everyone involved in the project. And all of this is important to Reckitt as it links back to that concept of building resilience within the supply chain. It's not just about building resilience so we can ensure that we've got the supply of the natural raw material that we need for our products, but building the resilience in those communities, the resilience within the farmers that we're dependent on to ensure that they are thriving as well. So Earthworm Foundation, they're one of our key partners. We've been working with them since 2016 in southern Thailand, and they've really been focusing on the adoption of sustainable agricultural practices in this landscape. They've been working to build capacity with farmers, not just on how they can improve yield and quality of their latex, but improving the biodiversity and enhancing things like soil health. And they are really critical to Reckitt when it comes to delivering our nature agenda, because they are so well connected and embedded within the region that we can leverage the relationships that they've got. So, for example, last year, they facilitated, along with MBI, a stakeholder engagement event that we ran in the landscape, where we met with other NGOs, local farmer cooperatives, local government officials, and local researchers. And we used that additional analysis that I talked about, that landscape analysis, to drive conversations with those key stakeholders to understand, well, is the analysis reflecting what's actually happening on the ground? What types of interventions could we also support? The solutions that we could put in place that would have the biggest impact, not just on improving biodiversity, but improving the livelihoods and the surrounding areas of these communities. And so a lot of the work that Earthworm has been doing is focused on agronomic and agroforestry projects, but they're also involved in a range of other activities around human-elephant conflict, R&D and restoration projects as well. So they're very well placed for us to engage with to support quite a wide breadth of nature-based solutions. Next to that, we've got the Fair Rubber Association, who are very critical for us in terms of sourcing rubber sustainably from our farmers. And they administer a premium that we pay into. And one of the key reasons why we pay into this premium is that it empowers the farmers to make decisions, because they decide where and how that premium is spent. And one of the groups that's part of that is the Sustainable Rubber Association. And they've got over 1,000 members, and they facilitate not only the implementation of the FRA standard, but they are working with Earthworm to understand and identify what other activities they can spend that premium on that will not only have a benefit for them as a business owner, as a farmer, but also benefit their community and their ecosystem. And so we're now able to engage with them using that additional work that we've done with MBI. And could I just skip down to my final slide? Apologies, I've run a little bit over. Just want to say thank you. If you want to find out a bit more about this, please visit the Reckitt.com sustainability reporting page. And as Peter's already mentioned, the nature-based blueprint, we're featured in there along with some other great examples from some other organisations that have been implementing nature-based solutions. So again, thank you very much. Happy to answer any questions later.
Thanks so much, Tom. That was really interesting to see all the exciting work that Reckitt has been doing in this space. So I would now like to invite the panelists to turn their videos on, if not on already, as we will now be going to the Q&A session. I would also like to remind people who are viewing the webinar today to pop their questions in the Q&A bar, and also to please upvote your favourite questions. I will be putting forward your favourite questions to our panelists, and they will be answering them live today. So if I just move to the Q&A, so I'm just going to refresh it to make sure that we've got the top favourite. So the first question is from Pranav, and he's asking, is there any protection against greenwashing in the nature-based solutions tool usage? And I'd like to put that question to Boris, please, if you could answer that one.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks. I mean, it's a big item. IUCN have put a lot of effort in consulting around nature-based solutions when they were developed. Yeah. So if you look into the nature-based solutions and the whole package, you will see that it really a very thoroughly looks into those safeguards, and basically they are a prerequisite. So it's not only looking into the intervention as such, but it's also some of the dimensions that have been referred to by other panelists. Yeah, and Tom, for example, mentioned some of them. A community consultation, involvement, a sustainability and monitoring over a long-term period, and so that's all part of the design. IUCN has access to the self-assessment tool. Of course, you can kind of review some of the critical nature-based solutions in that regard. So we are really putting a lot of effort in that, and of course, kind of that is this a background governance system that exists around a nature-based solutions and involvement of a global standards is also sort of safeguarding against. Yeah. This said, of course, kind of different types of usages exist, but I mean we have really put a lot of effort into making sure that there isn't much a washing in any color.
Thank you, Boris. Thank you so much. The next question is from you, who's said, thanks for the presentation. Do you have any key advice for building the case internally to implement and invest in nature-based solutions? So I would like to pop this question over to Peter, if you wouldn't mind answering, please.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll try to rein myself in here because I could present an entire webinar on this question alone. In fact, I have, and I probably will do again. But in short, I mean, as a starting point, I think the work that we mentioned before on the nature-based solutions blueprint is a good starting point for an answer to this question. So that really has been looking at as an internal business case building process, finding what the challenges are the business already needs to take action on, and looking for NBS that can help the company to address those specific challenges. And there might be legislative, it might be compliance and regulations, it might be about risk mitigation and management, it might be about quality of supply of materials going into the supply chain. There's lots of different challenges that companies can kind of attach the NBS to, but the critical sort of next step in that process is understanding what the full range of benefits that arise from that NBS could be, and bringing that all into the business case itself. So recognizing that I'm choosing this NBS in order to address a key challenge, a key problem that the company needs to take action on, or maybe two key challenges, you might be able to tie them together. But from there, if we do this NBS, we will also get cleaner air, cleaner water, better quality agricultural, agroforestry products, just kind of stacking up that portfolio of benefits, and then using that full value proposition to balance against what the alternative solution to the original business challenge was. So if we do wetland restoration, we get all these incredible things coming out of it. How does that compare to if we build a series of dams? And that's kind of the process. Again, it's all kind of articulated in the NBS blueprint. There's plenty more to see in there, but I'm reining myself in. That's the short version of the answer.
Thank you so much, Peter. So the second question is from Helen, and it's directed to Rachel. So the question asks, for Rachel, you mentioned the peatland restoration was a requirement of the development of wind farms. How important do you think that requirement was in accessing investment from within Scottish Power? Do you think without the requirement, Scottish Power would have such a big focus on nature-based solutions and peatland restoration?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think so. The initial requirement to deliver peatland restoration, that would have facilitated investment, the initial investment to say, yes, we need to go ahead and do peatland restoration. The next question after that is how much are we going to do? And I think, for to use Whiteley, that case study I gave in my presentation, that our impact on peatland there was 97 hectares, but our restoration was 1,100 hectares. So there is a decision made at some point about how much peatland restoration you're going to do, so that you compensate or mitigate for your impacts, but then you can choose the option to go and then deliver, a huge area of enhancement, which is what we decided to do at Whiteley. And that, there was no requirement for us to deliver that much peatland restoration, but we decided to do it because of a lot of the benefits that Peter has just talking about there. But, from a reputational point of view, as a responsible developer, it pays, from a business point of view, it pays us dividends further down the road, when we can be ambitious and deliver these large scale nature-based solutions, when we are coming on to do new developments or repower existing sites, it puts us in a good position with our stakeholders. So hopefully that answered your question.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rachel. So the next question I would like to put to Annie, please. So it's from John, who's asked, what would be considered a business case other than a legislative requirement?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, John, for the question. And I think as Peter kind of spoke to in his response on the blueprint and the map itself, when looking to build a business case, legislative requirements are just one of the list of core business challenge and opportunity that you'll see when you go through the blueprint and the map itself. And when you read through that, you'll see there's so many other challenges and opportunities that you can use to support the development of a business case for MBS. And we've structured it in terms of core business, climate, social inequity, and nature. So for example, you could have supply chain resilience, that could support you with building a business case. You could have using MBS to support cost reduction, reducing climate, or using for climate mitigation or climate adaptation. And what you can do going through the blueprint, what you'll see as well with those case studies, the companies that have implemented MBS have realized a wide range of different benefits and supporting different challenges as well. So I think legislative requirements absolutely are one valuable way to build a business case, but there's a lot of other challenges and opportunities that they can support with as well to build a more holistic case as well for implementing MBS internally.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So the next question I'm going to put to Tom, please. It's from Steve, who's asked, once a nature-based solution type and possible location is identified through the various tools available, how is a company linked with the possible nature-based solutions provider on the ground?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So for us at the moment, we are working, as I said in my slides, very closely with Earthworm Foundation, and they're at the moment our kind of key provider in helping us deliver those solutions on the ground. I'm sure, like many people on the call, constantly getting emails from other people from other areas offering to support on nature-based solutions, but it has to be in the right place and it has to be with the right partner. So as I mentioned, we've been working with Earthworm for a long time, and we have that link, that trusted connection with them. So we know that we can have those open, transparent conversations with them about what needs to be delivered and how it needs to be delivered. We can also leverage their experience from within the landscape that we don't necessarily have. So in having those connections with those delivery partners is really critical to ensure, in my opinion, really critical to ensure successful delivery of any nature-based solution.
Thank you very much. So the next question is from Michael, and I'd like to put this to Rachel, please. Can you please share any experience of working with different measuring technologies such as drones, eDNA, AI, ML identification, bioacoustics, human experts, citizen science, etc.?
Yeah, I can refer to some of those. So we use drones quite regularly in our monitoring surveys. It's a really, especially when you're dealing with large expanses of land, it's a really time efficient way to gather data. So we use that to look at the progress of our peatland restoration work. The other one, eDNA, that's quite a new emerging technology, but something that we're really interested in. So we're going to be working with a partner next year to trial that. So basically that is taking samples. I think we'll be taking water samples and soil samples on our peatland restoration sites to measure the eDNA levels, you know, and that'll be really interesting because we can compare that. So if we do that on our sites that have our peatland restoration areas that have been restored, you know, we can compare that to a control site, you know, that's not been impacted, and then also a degraded peatland site, so we can compare our results to, you know, to see if our the DNA levels are higher in our restored areas, for example. Question disappeared, so I can't see what the other things on the list were, but I think the other things on the list I don't think we've really looked at yet, because it is quite a new and emerging area, but it's definitely, you know, there's a lot happening, and it's definitely options to look at different ways of monitoring these works.
Thank you very much, Rachel. The next question is from Jackie, who's asked, can businesses collect carbon credits, even if minuscule, from edge of field practices like prairie strips, riparian buffers, etc.? Whilst these practices are great for biodiversity and water management, I have found that carbon credits are much more tangible for leaders when developing a business case. I'd like to put this question to Boris, please.
Yeah, certainly. Well, I mean, of course, kind of, you know, this big realm of carbon credits, you know, and there are some lessons to be drawn from it. So what we are engaging now into is to try to develop something that would, you know, be linked to biodiversity credits, where we can then track basically our performance on biodiversity indicators, and then see how much, you know, we've been supporting what we call kind of nature positive at large. So that is one of the ways how we are trying to develop this area. We will see basically how that matrix works in this particular case, but we are introducing measures like green bonds, and then linking to nature related performance. If I may just kind of, you know, reflecting back on some of the questions which were on monitoring, I see a couple of them. I just put one interesting link into how we can basically monitor performance of nature-based solutions over a long period of time, and then look into social, environmental, and economic benefits as well, which is basically one big package.
Thank you very much, Boris. So the next question is from you. How can companies ensure that local communities and stakeholders are involved in nature-based solutions inventions? I would like to put this question to Annie, please.
Thank you, Hayley. And I think, yeah, so it's all through appropriate design. Like, I think when Peter and I spoke about the in our presentation using the blueprint and the tool, it was all about how do you build a business case and how do you identify which nature-based solutions to implement in which regions. But I think kind of what we finished on our presentation, that question of how do you appropriately implement nature-based solutions, and, you know, the IUCN global standard, Tom spoke about it as well, engaging local communities is absolutely vital. And I think that is a core, if companies using the map as well, it has to be a core area of focus for getting buy-in and having a successful implementation of nature-based solutions on the ground. And when looking at the map, what we have as well in the bottom section is that piece on equity and stakeholder inclusion local growers, local farmers, all of that is included as a core area within the map itself. And it's definitely an area of focus and a crucial area for implementing appropriate NBS.
Thank you very much, Annie. The next question is actually directly for you, Rachel. So it's from Dr. Raju. Does the windmill farm shown in the Scottish Power presentation not impact the avian fauna?
So in the UK, when you build an onshore wind farm, an offshore wind farm as well, but to focus on onshore, you have to go through a very stringent process, an environmental impact assessment. And a part of that from an ecological point of view is to undertake bird surveys. So basically the process is front loaded, so you undertake a large amount of bird surveys before your wind farm even goes into planning. So this means you have a good idea of the use of the area of your wind farm, you know, how it is used by birds. So to use Whiteley as an example, you know, we know that that area is not used very often by birds that are at high risk of impact from turbines. So that's why it's a good place to put a wind farm. And certainly we see that a lot in the UK, that the UK doesn't have big impacts on bird populations because of all the effort that goes into siting them in the right place. But we do also monitor all of our sites operationally just to audit that and check that. So we're pretty confident that impact on a site like Whiteley on birds is very minimal, and we have, you know, data to support that as well.
Thank you, Rachel. So the next question is from Sarah, who's asked, for smaller businesses, are there any specific certifications that can start them on their nature-based solutions flag? So that's forestry, land use and agriculture, emission reduction journey. So I'd like to put this to Peter, please.
Absolutely. I mean, I think specific actually, so I'll just check. That's the second question on the list, right? Not the most upvoted one at the moment.
Oh, it's not refreshed properly for me. We'll do this one and then we'll go to Helen's after.
Cool, no problem. Just making sure I'm answering the right question in the list here. Yeah, so in terms of, it's all good. In terms of specific certifications for smaller businesses starting on the NBS flag emission reduction journey, I mean, this one is difficult because obviously some of the flag processes are still being set up. And so at this point in time, probably the best argument would be to be certifying to make sure that those activities are actually taking place. But I do want to kind of pull out part of this discussion around NBS and climate action, just to make sure that we aren't over-focusing solely on the climate outcomes from it, right? So those certifications, certainly there's a range of third-party players in the space who can provide those. There's also obviously guidance that's available from the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, at least in draft form, about land sector removals and so on. That also includes some flag guidance as well. But it is, I mean, a point to keep kind of bringing up in each of these conversations is that these NBS activities do so many things over and above the climate mitigation piece, that even as those certifications are taking place, important to keep an eye on what the biodiversity impacts of those activities are, what the equity impacts of those activities are, and what the business impacts of those activities are. So we aren't over-focusing on trying to make this solely about revenue generation through carbon credits, but building out a full picture of all of the value that these NBS activities are basically bringing to pass.
Thank you very much. So the next question is from Helen, and apologies that it wasn't asked before. So the question I'm going to put to Tom, please. Do you see examples of nature-based solutions being implemented by companies that don't directly source natural raw materials, i.e. where the impacts may be in tier 2 or 3 or even further in the supply chain?
Well, so the people that we're engaging with, our farmers, they are not tier 1 or tier 2 suppliers. In some instances, they are quite far up our supply chain. I think we've seen, from what I've seen, a lot of the work in our area is in the natural raw materials because it's linked to risk and the risk to disruption within the supply chains. But I think we've obviously had quite a good example on here from Rachel that isn't a natural raw material, that you're seeing how nature-based solutions can be implemented by an organisation to have a really positive impact just through the desire to have a positive impact as well.
Thank you. So the next question is from Marlin, who said, thank you for very insightful presentations. Can any of the panelists reflect on the connection with community benefit, just transition angle? I was intrigued by Rachel's reflection on the cultural aspect of the peatland restoration, for instance. So could I put this question to both Rachel and Tom? So Rachel, if you want to answer first, and then Tom next.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's a really interesting point the just transition angle is really critical and important that we don't overlook it. And to use, my example of Whiteley again, before the wind farm was there, it was a very inaccessible piece of land. There were no access tracks or access for the local communities. But now, since the wind farm's there, there's hundreds of kilometers of tracks there now, which allow local communities to use. And Whiteley is used by huge, thousands and thousands of people every year come to Whiteley to use the area. So it does open, and the peatland restoration is done part of the education piece as well around the ranges, and we have a visitor centre there as well. So it allows, an area of land that wasn't easily accessible to local communities before. It now opens that up. So I think we think about involving stakeholders in decisions around nature-based solutions, and local communities are really important stakeholders in that, finding out what they want and making these solutions work for local communities is really important.
Tom, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I just echo really what Rachel said. It's really important that you engage with those local communities, those local stakeholders, and we've definitely 100% seen that on the ground, not within our Thailand landscape, but another landscape that we're working on. We've gone out, we've spoken to the local communities, and we've seen instances where decisions have been made that they have not been taken into consideration, and it's had a massive impact on them, particularly in areas where protected areas have been outlined by local governments or regional governments. And these people have then lost a cultural link to an area that is important to them for spiritual reasons, for sourcing of food, herbal medicines. And it's really important that you talk to these people to understand that whatever action you put in place isn't going to have a negative impact on them and their cultural aspect. And I would highly recommend, I'm kind of shopping something other event here, there's a nature-based solutions initiative over at Oxford, run an event every couple of years that focuses on nature-based solutions. And a big focus of that is on the cultural aspect of nature-based solutions. You can go and check out the presentations that were actually done this year, and they bring in Indigenous leaders that talk about this, talk about how activities are put in place and there's no consideration given to them or their communities, and how that just has a massive detrimental impact on them and on those communities locally.
Thank you very much. So the next question is from Gareth, and I'd like to put this as a joint question to both Annie and Peter, please. So Annie, if you'd like to answer first, and then Peter. So the question from Gareth is, looking at the panelists and indeed some of the fellow attendees, we all work across a huge variety of industries and different parts of the supply chain. What can be done to mitigate increasing fragmentation of technical solutions? As a retailer, we are aware of a solution and success measures we introduce with our suppliers may be different compared with other retailers. Primary producers, for example, small-scale farmers, are then faced with overwhelming burden to provide similar or different data points. What can be done to ensure more alignment and less fragmentation? So Annie, would you like to answer first, please?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Gareth. I think it has to go down to, from my point of view, improved kind of collaboration, working across, particularly at the supply chain level, depending on if you're kind of a tier 1, tier 2. I saw a question as well there. It was if for companies that aren't necessarily involved or have direct interactions with nature, like how do they implement nature-based solutions? And I think it needs to come down to kind of using a standardized approach to looking at nature-based solutions, understanding the benefits and challenges that they can support with, as well as implement or focusing on them as kind of focusing on them as part of a standardized design. So the likes of the IUCN global standard, and really trying to standardize the implementation of nature-based solutions, as well as kind of improving collaboration as well across the supply chain and engagement as well.
So I'll just add on to something that. Thanks, Hayley. Yeah, so I think the kind of the starting point for this piece, obviously, is that the space that we're in certainly isn't sophisticated enough or mature enough on this particular topic in order to give specific solutions to begin with now, right? But it is worth pointing out that this is a message that we hear regularly at the WBCSD, that supply chain engagement as a practice overall is a really difficult, complex, and intricate process. but also that kind of managing data alignment as a major part of that conversation is really, really tricky. There is a developing example that we're working on in the climate space. So I don't know an enormous amount of it, being part of the nature team rather than the climate team, but which is called the Partnership for Carbon Transparency, or PACT for short. And that's really looking at streamlining and standardizing the way that that climate information and data is basically captured and stored, and trying to make some of that information cross-compatible with the different platforms, tools, solutions, etc., that companies are using in order to take action on their climate objectives, obviously with their supply chain. So I think that model certainly is one of the things that we could definitely turn to, and it's perhaps a practical example of what Annie was talking about in terms of improving our collaboration. So it's not just increasing it, but also improving the way that we do that, to have some kind of centralization process that allows us to take in different types of data, so that it doesn't become incumbent upon farmers, for example, to provide 3 different types of data output for the 3 different companies who source from them kind of along their supply chain.
Thank you very much. So we've got a couple of questions from Ricardo. Boris, I know you've answered one live in the Q&A box there, but I was just wondering if you would like to comment on those live. So the first question is the one that you answered, actually. Thank you, Boris, for the presentation. Would it be possible to share any updates about the certification scheme for nature-based solutions? Is this certification aimed for businesses?
Oh yeah, that's a very good question, and I can say that it is an important discussion taking place. As I mentioned at the beginning, nature-based solutions have not been designed as a normative standard as we do with some others. We rather organize it as a set of criteria and indicators. Yeah, so that's the way how it works. But then a lot of discussion about a certification, and that's essentially where the self-assessment tool comes from. It's sort of a first step. So it's not a formal certification, but can kind of guide a MBS developers into whether the MBS is intervention according to the standard or not. So it's an ongoing discussion. So we don't have a certification process as yet, but that's part of the MBS governance at present.
Thank you. And I know you're in the middle of writing an answer to Ricardo's next question. So when using the global ecosystem typology to identify biomes, would it be possible to share recommendations to conduct this step?
Yeah, I mentioned IBET. IBET is a really, really good standard because, of course, the global ecosystem typology is important, and kind of, it really depends on scale. What we are aiming at is to granulate as much as possible. So for, MBS or business developers, MBS developers, really to understand what's their impact on a particular, land. Yeah. So IBET is exactly that. So that would be kind of, my advice if you're really interested. Try to apply IBET, and then you will see basically what is your impact on a particular land in terms of protected conserved areas, species, ecosystem services as well. There is another one, it's called STAR Matrix, and that is basically looking into the impact of your intervention on species. So again, you're looking into your intervention, a physical area, and then you can understand better, how can you contribute to biodiversity conservation and species conservation and so. So those are 2 interesting tools, STAR and IBET. So if you're interested, I'm really happy kind of to have a chat and really zoom into in detail.
Thank you. And just conscious of time, we have a question that is actually directed at the whole panel. It's from Stephen. So does the panel think the case for ecocide would be received well by businesses? So I'm just going to go to each panelist individually, and I'll start with Tom because you're at the top of my screen. What are your thoughts on this question?
If I'm interpreting it right, no, wouldn't be welcomed by us because, like I said in my presentation, we're reliant on ecosystems, natural raw materials. This kind of vandalism, destruction doesn't benefit anybody. So no, it wouldn't be well received by any business, any reputable business. At least I'll add that in.
Thank you. Rachel?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just echo what Tom said. I think anyone who's a responsible developer, would not be interested in that. And yeah, I would just confirm that as well.
Thank you. And Annie, probably the similar thoughts on that one.
Likewise, yeah, absolutely. No, agree with Rachel and Tom on that one.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, I'm just conscious of time. We're coming up to the end of our Q&A. Thank you everybody for your fantastic questions that were submitted into the box, and thank you to our excellent panelists for a great Q&A session, and also for your really inspiring presentations earlier. So I would like to hand back over to Sarah, who's going to finish up this webinar today with some final comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Hayley, for wonderfully hosting and moderating this session. And thank you too to our wonderful panelists, Annie, Rachel, Tom, Boris, and Peter. You've got through an impressive amount of questions, so thank you for sharing some great insight, examples, and tools. And also, just to say thank you to everyone in the chat, because you've also shared a huge amount in there. So we'll be mining that when we look at our key takeaways. So thank you all. So just a few final words. So what next? We've got some upcoming engagement opportunities. This is just the first 4 webinars, so please make sure you signed up for all the other sessions in the series. The next webinar is next Tuesday, and we'll be looking at how businesses can implement nature-based solutions in the built environment, either as part of developing a new build, retrofitting an old building, or for those businesses operating in rented spaces where they can't necessarily alter the existing infrastructure. So we'll be looking at some examples of urban solutions they can invest in to support broader ecosystem resilience. And we've got a great panel of speakers from the UK Green Building Council, ARUP, Polypipe, Earthwatch, and Funding Circle. So please be sure to register by following the link in the chat. We also have some more opportunities for engagement going on with the UN Global Compact Network UK outside of this webinar series. We're hosting a 3-part Addressing Energy-Related Emissions webinar series to help businesses learn how they improve their energy efficiency, reduce their energy use, and contribute to supporting the increasing generation and storage capacity of renewable energies. We've got the second webinar in the series taking place on Thursday, the 19th of September. This will focus on best practices for on-site energy development and renewable energy procurement. So please register for that one too. And we have our annual summit coming up on the 1st of October, which will be held at the London Guildhall. The theme this year is Bridging the Ambition to Action Gap, and we'll be tackling that through a range of panel discussions, fireside chats, practical workshops, and lots of networking opportunities as well. To view the agenda and find out more about how you can get tickets to join us either in person or to attend virtually via the live stream, please also click on the link in the chat. So that brings us to an end. Thank you again to One Carbon World for supporting us with this series. And thank you to everyone for joining, all of our panelists, all of our lovely audience. Hopefully we will see you again next week. And in the meantime, please have a wonderful rest of your day and rest of your week. Thank you very much, everyone. Goodbye.